Okay, thank you all for joining this morning for this webinar on preemptive intelligence in the financial sector. I am Luke Angus. I'm VP for EMEA, looking after the silent push business across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I'd like to introduce Ken Bagnall, our CEO and founder, head of our push towards a global preemptive cyber defense platform. We're providing indicators of future attack, a unique offering that we have, a silent push. Ken founded Email Laundry a while back, which was later acquired by FireEye, where he served as VP of product. During that time, brought up this concept of future attack indicators or indicators of future attack, and has spent his whole career helping organizations get ahead of these advanced threats. Ken, I'll pass to you to take things away.
Thanks, Luke. Yeah, so we're going to focus on financial sector today, and there's been a lot of change in terms of how adversaries are setting up and managing their infrastructure, launching campaigns. But thankfully, there's also evolution on the defender side, so we want to make sure that people are aware of what's available now. In quite a lot of cases, I think people had given up on preventative blocking in many ways, particularly based on intelligence, because it was very difficult to maintain a view of threat actor infrastructure. But there's a lot more capabilities available on the defender side now to allow us to move to actually see threat actors as they set up and manage their infrastructure and staging, so that we can actually provide information to block those patient zero attacks and pick up stuff from the very first time a campaign is launched, instead of having to wait until it has affected somebody prior, which is kind of what threat intelligence provided up to now. Everything was based on post-breach information somewhere that was then shared, and then those what were indicators of some unfortunate soul's compromise was, what you were depending on. However, the rate and scale of adversaries setting up and managing their infrastructure is way too high for that to actually be of any use. And it's also far too cheap for them to set up and manage infrastructure at scale. So, getting ahead of this and watching them set up their infrastructure and blocking it in advance is really necessary now. Um, what we're doing here is having a pretty dramatic effect. In the last week, we have stopped patient zero first attacks on many of the world's largest organizations, from APT groups, nation state groups, as well as crime as a service operators to the other groups, which is one of the key things that we go after, because we always try and go after things as early as possible. So in a way, it's more important for us to go after initial access brokers than anybody else and that type of thing. So we're very thoughtful about who it is that we are going after, and then who they are providers for as well. So we're going to take a look at the overall state of play between defenders and attackers, particularly in terms of what they're setting up in their pre-attack infrastructure. And we'll have a particular view on how that affects finance companies. And then we'll go into, some good examples that kind of highlight the scale and ease of the setup of attacker infrastructure, but also some of the tricks as to how we can see that at scale as it's been set up. So all detection products, as we know from people who provided the endpoint protection products in the past, they are reliant on someone being hit in some way, even if it's only hitting a sandbox and then calling out to attacker infrastructure, before people actually, can share those indicators across security tools. And that has a number of problems, because each security vendor, is also siloed in terms of what they see they can share across their customers, but often they don't break out and share it with each other. So That leads to a huge number of problems and a large delay in people um, finding the latest infrastructure as it happens. So if they're scaling quickly with automation and stealth, how do we get ahead of what they're doing? So it's starting to become largely appreciated that, this preemptive defense strategy has to be embraced by everybody. Gartner are starting to uh, go on about it and start to emphasize different preemptive defense strategies people can use in order to get ahead of this problem. And I think uh, financial institutions seem to be particularly suffering from the rate of change and the scale of change here. IBM X-Force highlighted the fact 67% of attacks were only detected after initial access was already gained, which is obviously very, very problematic, and it's way more expensive to leave things until the post-breach scenario and try and deal with incidents instead of getting ahead of it. So really the idea is here to try and increase resilience, reduce risk by creating these indicators of future attack to try and stop stuff on the edge instead of waiting until it gets in. The range of how far ahead we are, is very, very varied depending on the type of crime or APT infrastructure that we're dealing with or the group and how they manage their infrastructure. So it's not a simple process. And if it is an APT group, we find that they age their infrastructure by a year. So you could be looking at something for a year before it's actually active. While if we look at, the people referred to as those pesky kids or scattered spider, you will be looking at, something within an hour, right? Or two. So you've got to have very different timelines for monitoring and responding to this infrastructure as it's getting stood up. Uh, and that, of course, gives us a very difficult job because how do you actually tackle this problem, right? And we have to monitor the entire internet for all changes in technical relationships every day, and then apply our data science and our actual human knowledge as well to what we're seeing in order to cluster up different people managing their infrastructure. So it's an enormous task, right? To monitor all changing technical relationships every day on the internet is pretty huge. When we talk about technical relationships, we have a particular view of technical infrastructure. We're looking at changing relationships in DNS. We're looking at what gets stood up on the end of those records. Do servers appear? Is it a mail server on an MX record, etc., or is there a web server or something on an A record? And then finally, we're looking at, does something other than a server get stood up there? Is there content on the end? Are there control panels, that type of thing? But that's kind of three-point view of changing infrastructure is how we do create our technical fingerprints of people managing their infrastructure. Um, so in order to do this, we have to be an extremely aggressive uh, data collection company. And we have done all of this from first principles, because in order to detect threat actors, you actually have to do a lot of this differently to how it had been done. Um, so, for example, for scanning web infrastructure, we have to do it covertly as if we were more of a threat actor than traditional how people had been scanning, because it's very important that we are not detected by the threat actors and blocked, right? Which is type of problems that we would have had in previous security companies. If you scan from Amazon or something, right? All threat actors have just blocked scanning from Amazon. It's like a default setting at this point. So, you can scan things and find nothing, but it's not because there's nothing there. It's because nobody's letting you see it. So it's really important that all of these things are done in a sensible way from first principles. And for that reason, we can't buy in data. We have to make everything from scratch. But the initial data collection is actually not as important as the next step, which is change analysis, because change detection and grouping that into behaviors that mirror what some crime organizations' processes are is really what's key to us, because this has to reflect real world processes of APT groups or crime groups as they manage their infrastructure. Uh, because, remember again, we're trying to get these guys as they prepare their infrastructure in the staging process before it's used, which means we have to get very, very early detection. But on top of that, we group that into what is what and build out our indicator of future attack feeds from that. But the different ways we look at it give us this really important timeline in terms of what gets you the earliest information, what type of the earliest detection on different types of crime groups. So if you imagine on the right-hand side of this is your traditional indicator of compromise when something is used, hits an organization, and then in traditional threat intel, it would have been shared amongst people from that point on. We're working backwards down the timeline, and the earliest we can actually see something in a way that for us identifies them uh, by how they're managing their infrastructure is on the changing relationships in DNS. So I'll give you kind of a brief outline of that in a minute, but really that automation that someone sets up when they are buying their domains and then setting them up to move across IP spaces that they've rented on different hosting providers, etc., is key part of the fingerprinting process. And then monitoring it from then on, you know, what what does that point to? Does that change? Does that indicate they're using a particular type of setup like Evil Engine X or something? Um, we also have the reverse type of monitoring where we're actually doing our own honeypots to create signatures of inbound scanning. We map residential proxy networks, etc., so that we have context on different IP infrastructure as to what is coming out of it. And then finally, we're looking at fingerprinting actual content as it appears there. So control panels, phishing pages, different scripts, etc. that are on pages. So that's kind of the timeline of detection. We're always trying to detect on the first step. Um, Often step number 4 there is more of a confirmation that something is what we expected it to be, rather than anything else. But all of this is, a relatively new science in terms of we've been doing it for 5 years, right? But I think it's only uh, really becoming commonly acceptable that this is a valid and popular way to go and is very effective. Um, so to give you some examples of what you can do now with this type of information. So for example, Triad Nexus is the Chinese triads who own, they're not only the largest crime group in the world, but they own the largest cybercrime infrastructure that is used for crime as a service across many, many of the crime groups that you would know of, including money laundering as a service for them. And you'll have come across things they do, like they do tech company impersonation of Amazon and TikTok, etc. But they do fake trading apps, which are commonly used in pig butchering, etc. And this allows us to monitor, everything that this enormous crime group does, for example. But also because we're looking at everything that exists and not just at crime infrastructure, it means we actually have this view of each company's infrastructure themselves. So we actually have, all of this fingerprinting, etc., on each company's own infrastructure. So you can see our view of your own infrastructure as well as of crime infrastructure, which of course can be very revealing. Um, we do particularly track threat actors that our customers are most concerned about, but we also are steered by the industries that we look after. So, the different ISACs like the FS ISAC, put out the things of concern to the industry, and then we do steer our research in the direction of what is of concern to people at the time, which is why you'll see we've done so much work on things like uh, the North Korean remote worker thing that was going on for the last while at quite a high volume. Um, so we do respond to what's required from the industry and what is affecting people the most. But most importantly, we're always on the edge of what the emerging trends are, and get called in by government organizations to assist with particular projects in that regard. So if we take a real world example, it's kind of easier for people to kind of get an idea of how this works. So um, there is a malicious content delivery network provider called Funnel, who are part of that infrastructure used by what we call Triad Nexus, which is just the Chinese Triads crime group. Um, and they manage a lot of their infrastructure through what we call canonical name records, right? So CNAME records. Um, so last night, this fake Goldman Sachs um, site was up and live. So you can see that's like from a live scan. It was up last night. And there's a number of things that are quite telling about it, right? So it has 130 A records. It has a what we call an IP diversity of 12, which means the rate of change of the domain across IP space is 12. Um, but this infrastructure, has different mobile apps associated with it. It has online support in multiple languages. Uh, it can be delivered, localized in Japanese or whatever you want, as you can see here. Um, it has been live though for 305 days, right? So it's been up on one of our indicator future attack feeds for 305 days. Um, this is like 100% part of a particular crime group's infrastructure. We know what it's used for, how it's used, um, but it's very difficult for people to deal with, and it's very difficult for people to take down through traditional methods because traditional abuse reporting doesn't really fit the scale of this type of crime infrastructure, and how it works. And it's very difficult for even the hosting providers to deal with. So it's still not recognized by the majority of the security industry, even 9 months later, right? Zero detections. So we refer to this type of infrastructure as infrastructure laundering because what's actually happening is there's a malicious provider sitting in the middle of the actual, the crime pages and a good high reputation uh, hosting company. So, some of this is going to Microsoft Azure on 8075, it's on AWS. But one of the tricks that they're doing with this infrastructure laundering layer is that it allows them to move the infrastructure continuously between non-collaborating jurisdictions. So it's going from US hosting provider to a Chinese hosting provider, and back again, so that it's nobody is ever kind of fully responsible for the takedown. And of course, there's very little collaboration between the two, which is why, that has survived for 305 days, even though it's such a uh, obviously problematic piece of crime infrastructure, um, which is active, right? Um, that piece of infrastructure is used for uh, high trust social engineering, romance investment scams, etc., pig butchering. So people generally will put all of their life savings into this fake trading application is basically the end result of it. Um, so, the ideal situation is we can actually monitor this as it's being prepared, and we can let people actually defend against it, right? And that could be at any level. It could be like a national DNS service that we give to a government, or it could be to the hosting providers to do the takedowns, or it could be to the actual financial institutions themselves who want to deal with it. Um, but if we kind of give you some insight, because this is a very simple one for us to track, so we'll try and share with you how we track it. So what actually is happening here is the fake Goldman Sachs is pointed at this CNAME record, and it's the CNAME record is moving through these IP addresses, not the actual uh, domain itself. However, that record actually has well over 1,000 of these fake trading applications on it. So we can monitor that CNAME record every day to see what's new and pick it up, right, as it's being prepared. Even before these pages are there, we'll see it as it's being prepared. But that is one CNAME record. This is what this part of the infrastructure has. They have over 1,000 of those records, and each of those 1,000 has over 1,000 um, pages or fake trading apps associated with it. Now, they're not actually all fake trading apps. They're all different crimes, and they file them by CNAME record. But this part of this Triad Nexus infrastructure has 1.4 million malicious host names live at any time. But by monitoring the DNS activity, we can actually just provide the list of all of them every day, right? So it's kind of a simple example for us in terms of how we can track it, but it's a very good example of the scale of the crime infrastructure and the scale that they're operating on and how difficult it is if you look at it from, a normal uh, team who are working in the SOC or something in a bank and they get an abuse report, they hear about, oh, there's a fake page, using our brand and people are putting their savings into it. It is very, very difficult with this type of scale of infrastructure and how it's set up and managed for you to actually deal with that and to implement some sort of a takedown on it. So we've also tried to leverage some, government assistance to deal with this type of thing. So uh, tr the U.S. Treasury acted on our information to put sanctions on anyone who is dealing with Funnel, which is the malicious CDN provider in this exact example. So that means that it puts pressure on hosting companies, etc., right? That they really have to do takedowns when they become aware of it. But it's easier if they try and do it at scale instead of one at a time, right? So it's easier if we can give the whole list of what is on their infrastructure or passing through their infrastructure related to funnel, and that they can always do the takedown without having to wait for an abuse report each time. So in a way, how we're revealing the problem is part of the solution. So we can expose how they're managing their infrastructure and the effect it has, and the effect it has on the whole financial industry, because everybody's trying to deal with this through individual reporting all the time, which is slightly ridiculous when we can see the whole thing at scale at once, and we can collectively try and take larger actions like getting US Treasury, etc., involved in implementing sanctions against what's involved. So, because we have these new tools available to us, we really need to start using them as an industry to make sure we affect change quicker. So we have lots of tools like this, right? I mean, we have about 150 different varieties of this, right? So, the one we're looking at there was kind of full CNAME chains, but we also have DNS automation, visibility, and change detection. So the CNAME chain you have seen, and we have that tool available in the free community app. So if any of your teams want to play around with any of these tools, you can sign them up for the Silent Push community app where they can see the underlying data and underlying tools, and try and play with them themselves. However, the same infrastructure we can track lots of different ways. So this is how it looks in terms of that domain moving across IP space and moving across hosting providers. Each different colored line is a different AS number, right? So it's going from Amazon to Cloudy to Amazon to CTG. So CTG is in China, Cloudy's in China, Amazon's US, right? So as I said, it's skipping back and forth between the US and China. But you can see on the right that there's a very exact pattern, and that gives us these numbers for the behavior of the domain across IP space. And we have the ability to search on these types of patterns, right? Including the combinations of providers that they use. So it gives us a very exact fingerprint, and we can also track everything they do in that manner. And then a third way to track the very same infrastructure um, is through the templates that they're using to provide all of those pages. So we have what we call a HTML content similarity search, which will uh, provide a search across all content that has a certain percentage similarity of how that is set up. So you can see immediately this gives us another Goldman Sachs page that is 96% similar. And sure enough, it looks like it's the exact same thing. Um, so there's many ways now available with all of these new data sets that we've created to hunt down and find this infrastructure in a 100% confident way that we know who it is, how they're managing it. We've many ways of checking, and therefore we can give like high confidence early early warnings as to what they've set up so that people can actually block it in advance, right? Just to give some quick other examples, but you can see these on our uh, blog, right, on the web page, because many of these are, of course, very specific to the financial services sector. We've written quite a bit on the DPRK and their two different opposing kind of campaigns that they have going. One for remote workers and another we call contagious interview, where they actually target people through job ads. Um, we provide the residential proxies and VPNs that they are using as well to customers so that they can filter applications that are coming in that are likely to be from the North Koreans. The Smishing Triad have launched a number of bank phishing kits. So this one is also very relevant. You can find it on our blog so that you can go into detail, but it's a hugely detailed report on them. So maybe get your teams to go through it because it's quite revealing. We do list the targeted brands, etc. We actually track this through server fingerprinting. So we have good fingerprints of their actual infrastructure, and we can find everything that they set up as they set it up. But that's another pretty important one for financial services because they evolve pretty quick and they're setting up continually many new strains of that. So with all of this new information, obviously the attackers have vastly accelerated their rate of change and the scale of infrastructure that they're coming from. Uh, but we have a huge amount of new tools and data that put us all in a very strong position if we work together to fight against these crime groups and APT groups. Um, by leaving things to post-breach information, the only people who really benefit are IR companies. So let's not make that the way forward. We think we'll keep seeing this continued new pace from the particularly financial crime groups. Fin7 are creating infrastructure at an enormous pace as well. Um, we will see some knowledgeable actors who are watching us, try and operate more from social engineering and have less exposed infrastructure. We've already seen that with the pesky kids, as we call them. Um, So there's very, very new types of data available. A lot of this is very fresh and I'm sure people need to become familiar with it. But we do give access to all of our underlying data through the free community app. Um, it's a great thing that we can now monitor threat actors in their preparation stages in a very confident manner and share it out for you to put into your security stack. So, through a neutral vendor, you can improve the detection on all across all of your security products. The effect is pretty dramatic. We have stopped patient zero attacks, from all of these groups in the last week. Pretty enormous effect, and kind of puts our work to good use.
Thanks, Ken. Really appreciate that. I believe, yeah, if anyone has questions, they can reach out to us after this webinar as well. But thank you for joining. If there is anyone that wants to go into further details on specific use cases or how this pertains to you, feel free to reach out to us as well. But thank you very much, Ken, and everyone for joining. We're here, so reach out. Thank you.